Speaking to Anthony Morrow, who's the co-founder of OpenMoney. Apparently, people are buying is the right term on tick. Anthony, is that right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's what we would have called tick, many years ago, and it's basically a new form of credit that's been created that's making it a lot easier for people to buy things that they can't necessarily afford at the time, and then spreading that payment out over a number of months.
I suppose it makes things what people think in their minds, things that they really, really want, achievable because they haven't got all the money there and then, but they can pay dribs and drabs.
Yeah, on the face of it, these things are quite useful if you know that you can afford to make the repayments when they fall due. Unfortunately, what we found is that almost 2/3 of people who use these schemes are finding that actually they're struggling to make the repayments, and I think this is just it's based around the fact that over the last few years, the amount of personal debt that people in this country have been building up has been growing and growing at quite a rate. So these new services are simply adding to that problem, but being dressed up through advertising, particularly on social media, has been quite fun, even to the point where, with the current circumstances, that it helps, take away some of the doom and gloom by buying something and treating yourself something, regardless of whether or not you can afford to make the repayments, down the line.
So where do the problems happen then? So, for example, if I want a Jaguar car, other cars are available, by the way. So if I want a big flash car, I can afford £200 a month, for example, but I can't afford 20 grand there and then.
Yeah, and I think what's different with these sort of services, so particularly the buy now pay later services, is that they are aimed at much lower value products, and therefore the decision to buy them, typically comes with less thought than you would buying a car. Buying a car is quite it's a big decision, and the amount that you pay is higher value, and therefore it is something that you would naturally budget. These services are more aimed at the really spontaneous and discretionary based, particularly fast fashion, which is where they really grew out of. So, some of the online retailers that have been in the press quite a bit recently, they've been big users of these, which have enabled people to buy, lots of clothes that perhaps they, don't really need, but it's given the impression that it's actually not costing them that much.
Oh, so you mean like the store cards kind of things,
Yeah,
Yeah, I've got you. Right.
it is, and it's a bit more, and it's even because these are online and they're digital, they're very slick, and they appear at the point where you filled up your basket of clothes online. You go to checkout, and then here's an option that enables you to divide that total into three, so therefore making it much more appealing. And some of the statistics show that actually these services are a real boon for the actual retailers, and they see a significant increase in the amount that people buy because they can see how they can spread it out than what they actually turned up to buy in the first place.
So if somebody finds themselves with a huge bill dropping on the doorstep or an invoice for something that they were like, oh my days, I've forgotten all about that, or it's got a bit out of hand, what should they do?
Well, I mean, with any problems regarding money in particular, and certainly debt, then the first port of call is always to speak to the person who you owe the money to. So the last thing you should never do, is just ignore it and hope that it goes away. Always pick up the phone to the lender, and usually you will find them to be sympathetic. In fact, particularly regulated ones, they're required to be quite sympathetic in terms of how they deal with people who can't afford repayments. So that's always the best place to go. If, like many people, they the point at which they find themselves in difficulty is quite far down the line, then pick up places like Citizens Advice Bureau. Step change will help you find a way in which you can sort your problems out.
I did get into. I've got a personal story with this. Do you want to hear my personal story with this? By the way,
I'd love to.
basically, there was I'm not going to say who they are, but you'll probably work it out. But back in the 90s and early noughties, there was an online music store. that you could get CD albums from.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the month, they will send you a bill. So I think because I wasn't paying for it there and then, I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that album, I'll have that one. I'll have that album there. So I was having 2, 3, maybe 4 a week. Then at the end of the month, I had this bill. And I'm like, oh, my dad, I can't afford that straight away. So then I start paying little bits off, but then some interest started to accrue on it and all that kind of stuff. So before you know it, I'm in a bit of a mess.
Yeah, that's it. And one of the, I think one of the areas that needs improving from both the service provider and also the retailer is the detail around these. So the terms and conditions tend to be hidden away. And debt is such a big thing that people really need to understand what it is they're getting into and what their obligations are, because failing to meet those obligations can have real life lasting effects on people, for a good number of years anyway. So understanding it should be essential. So, there's a lot more that these providers can do to just make sure customers don't get themselves into trouble, because it's not in anyone's interest to do that. And just with a bit more guidance and a bit more clarity, I think people can at least know what it is they're expected to do.
Is there any truth in this story? My dad was an old school chap. He's not with us anymore. But he used to say to me that if you pay your bills, you're a bank or you're a loan person's worst nightmare because they're not making any money from you. Is there any truth in that?
Well, there certainly is. I mean, if you look at the most common debt product, which is credit card, then credit card companies really only make money for those people who can't pay down their balance every month. Yeah, so those people who pay down the balance, you'll pay them an annual fee, but nothing like the sort of balance money they can make off people who run balances. Which is why, if you keep a balance going, you are more likely to get a balance increase, because they'll go, "Oh, congratulations, we've increased your balance by £1,000 and whatnot." So absolutely, debt, people who lend only make money on the interest. So that is the key. So it's always, if you can afford to save up for something that you really want and buy it outright, then not only will you not be paying anyone any interest, but you'll also feel a lot better. And the stress and anxiety that comes from owing money, particularly if you can't afford to pay it back, will go away.
That was going to be my next question to you anyway. What tips would you say to somebody if they want something that badly, but they see an option to, you can have it now, but you can pay a bit later? You got to look a lot into it, haven't you, first before you say yes?
Yeah, I think so. I think look, if it's something that's an emergency, like your cooker blows or a boiler, or there's repairs to your car and you desperately need your car fixing, then short-term credit often is the only way you're going to get that. The numbers in terms of how many people have got £1,000 in saving is minuscule in this country. So there are always circumstances where short-term debt is going to be needed. I think really have a think around how desperate you are for that item. And a lot of it, as I said earlier, a lot of these items are those which you wouldn't really class as essential. And just save up for it. Set yourself a goal. And if it takes you a few months to save up to buy it, then you'll feel a lot better about it. And you'll end up with the item without having got yourself into debt.
Anthony Morrow, co-founder of OpenMoney, thank you very much for your time and all your advice.
Thanks, Darren.